Selina Marsh was 39 years old when her husband walked out of the Mecklenburg County Courthouse with $5 million of what she had built, and a grin on his face like he had pulled the trick of a lifetime. To everyone watching from the gallery, she looked like a woman who had just lost everything. She wore a dark blazer she had owned for 7 years. Flat shoes, hair pulled back the way she always wore it to client sites. She carried a bag that cost $42. She had driven herself to the courthouse in a silver Accord with 94,000 miles on it, and she had parked 2 blocks away in a lot that charged $3 an hour. That was what Derek saw when he looked at her. That was what he had always seen. A woman of modest means who had been lucky enough to marry someone ambitious. He had said those exact words to his attorney during discovery. Lucky enough to marry someone ambitious. The judgment was for $5,200,000. Asset reallocation, the court called it. Derek's attorney had argued for 14 months that the construction contracts, the real property holdings, and the equipment leases had all originated through his professional network and his client relationships. The judge had agreed. What Derek did not know, what he had never once thought to ask in 11 years of marriage, was that the name on the holding company behind those contracts was not his. It had never been his. He walked out of that courthouse certain he had just won the whole game. He was right about one thing. He had just won something. He simply did not know yet what kind of thing he had won. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The house on Caldwell Lane was not large. It sat on a quiet street in Charlotte's West Side. A brick ranch with a deep yard, and a covered porch that Selina had screened in herself the summer she turned 34, 4 years into their marriage. She had framed it with cedar boards and hung a fan from the ceiling and laid composite decking that she had measured 3 times before cutting once. Her father had always said that. Measure 3 times. Cut once. He said it about lumber, and he said it about people, and he said it about decisions. And the truth of it had never changed no matter which thing he was measuring. Wallace Marsh had died of a stroke 3 years ago, and not a week had passed since, without Selina hearing his voice somewhere in the back of her working mind. He had been a general contractor for 31 years, and he had made Selina hold the tape, carry the level, read the blueprints before she was tall enough to see over the hood of his truck. He had pulled her out of bed on Saturday mornings to walk job sites before the dew was off the grass, and she had grumbled about it the way children grumble about the things that will define them. By the time she was 18, she could read a structural drawing the way other people read a newspaper. By the time she was 28, she had her own general contractor license, her own bonded company, and her first commercial build under contract. She had never told Derek any of that in a way that required him to believe it. The holding company had been her attorney's idea. A woman named Glynis, who had been her father's closest friend since their shared years in the trades, had sat across from Selina at a coffee table in the Dilworth neighborhood the year Selina got her license, and explained that the best structures were the ones people walked past without knowing what they were looking at. Selina had understood immediately. The holding company was established 8 months before she ever attended the trade show in Atlanta, where she met Derek Webb. They had met at a trade show in Atlanta 11 years ago. He was a sales representative for a building materials supplier, easy with conversation, tall enough that she had to look up slightly when he smiled at her. He had asked about her work, and she had given him the short version. Project manager, residential builds, nothing dramatic. He had found her steady manner interesting for about 3 months, which was unusual. Most men lost interest in her manner before the 3rd month. Then he had found it comfortable. Then he had found it useful, in the way certain men found dependable things useful, the way they found a well-made tool useful, without ever wondering what the tool had cost to make. The first years were not bad. She built her business quietly, and Derek worked his sales job and brought clients home for dinner and spoke about ambition at the table with the warmth of someone who had confused announcing plans with executing them. She had learned the difference between the two things early and chose not to remark on it. He was warm in those years. He told stories well. He remembered birthdays. He called her beautiful in public in a way that cost him nothing. He had his qualities. He was not cruel in those years. He was simply a man who saw what was in front of him and stopped looking. What was in front of him was a woman who drove an aging Accord and packed lunches and wore the same blazer to every professional event. He stopped looking. He was still not looking on the morning she noticed the gas receipt, which was a Tuesday in November, quiet and gray, with the ceiling fans clicking slowly above her head as she moved the laundry and found a small piece of paper folded into the pocket of his slacks. The first signal was a gas receipt. She found it on a Tuesday evening in November in the pocket of his slacks when she was moving laundry from the floor of the closet. She almost didn't read it. The habit of not monitoring a man she trusted had taken 11 years to grow roots, and those roots had become a kind of structural assumption, the way you assumed a floor was level until you put a tool on it and watched it roll. Something in the denomination caught her eye. $41 at a station in Concord, 40 minutes from their house, on a Wednesday afternoon 2 weeks prior when Derek had told her he was driving to Greensboro for a regional sales meeting. She set it on the nightstand and did not move it. She did not ask him about it. She was a structural engineer by training, contractor by profession, and she understood load and sequence better than she understood most things. You did not pull a single piece from an unknown structure without knowing what was bearing the weight above it. The piece you pulled might be decorative, or it might be the thing holding the ceiling in place. You surveyed first. You mapped what you were looking at before you decided what to do about it. She started surveying. The second gas receipt was in the console of his car, which she accessed the following Saturday while he showered. The third was a text preview that blinked across the top of his phone screen while it sat on the kitchen counter. A name she did not recognize. A message she could read only 2 words of before it disappeared. Those 2 words were enough to establish direction. Her hands did not shake. She took no photograph of the preview. There was nothing to photograph. But she noted the name and the timestamp, and the fact that he had not yet acknowledged the buzz of the notification, which told her the phone had been on silent mode, and he had simply forgotten to flip it back. He was not a careful man. That was useful information. Over the next 3 weeks, she moved through the surveying phase the way she moved through any site inspection, methodically, without attachment to what she expected to find, fully attentive to what she actually found. She accessed their joint account statements through the bank's portal. She found nothing unusual there because she had never relied on the joint account for anything that mattered, but she cross-referenced dates. A hotel charge on a Thursday in October. A dinner receipt from a restaurant she had never been told about. A wire transfer of $8,000 to an account she did not recognize. Executed in July, which she traced through the wire detail to a name she recognized as the same name on the phone preview. Her name was Courtney Vale. She was 31 years old, with a real estate license and a leased BMW and an Instagram that Selena found in 4 minutes. Courtney Vale used words like abundance and alignment and posted photographs of meals at restaurants that charged more than Selena's monthly car payment for a table for 2. The hotel charge was $340 a night. Selena noted all of it. She forwarded the wire transfer documentation to a secure folder on a device she kept separately. She built a timeline starting in June, which was as far back as the first traceable evidence ran, and noted that the pattern of charges suggested the relationship had been ongoing since at least April. 7 months. Calculated, sustained finance through a joint account he had apparently believed she monitored casually. She moved with the same deliberate calm that had always defined her. She closed the laptop. She made dinner. She called her father's oldest friend, a woman named Glynis who had watched Selina learn to read blueprints in Wallace Marsh's kitchen, and who was now, as she had been for 20 years, a family law attorney in Charlotte's Dilworth neighborhood. She opened a new folder on her desktop. She named it simply Caldwell. Glynis Okafor was 71 years old, and she had the kind of office that communicated nothing carelessly. Dark walnut furniture, a credenza stacked with casework, a window that looked into a courtyard where she had planted a fig tree 20 years before and watched it grow into itself without any assistance from her. She said that was how she knew it was right. Selina sat across from her on a Thursday morning, the folder open on the table between them. Glynis read through the documents the way she read through everything, completely, without comment, with the unhurried attention of a person who understood that the details in front of her were load-bearing. When she finished, she set the last page down and looked at Selina. "He's going to argue that your income and assets were commingled with the marital estate," Glynis said. "He's going to argue the contracts came through his network. He knows 2 of the clients by name," Selina said. "He introduced me at a dinner party in 2019 as someone who could quote them a deck project. That's the extent of his involvement." "Can you document the origination on the contracts?" "Every one of them. Ref P responses, bid submissions, bonding documents. All filed under Marsh Structural before he and I were married, and under the holding company from the year we were married forward. His name is not on any of it." Glynis was quiet for a moment. She folded her hands. "Then we're going to need a forensic accountant," she said, "because he doesn't know yet what he's looking at, and neither does his attorney. When they find out, this case is going to change shape." Real power operated in quiet rooms. 3 days later, Selina drove to her uncle's house in the Belmont neighborhood, a 40-year-old colonial that her uncle Raymond had bought in what he called the sensible years, when he still trusted the pace of a working life to carry him where he needed to go. He was 68 now, retired from the commercial electrical trade, and he kept a garden in the back that he tended with more patience than he had ever given anything else, except possibly Selina. She sat with him on the back porch and told him the shape of it. She didn't need to explain much. Raymond Marsh had known his niece since she was 6 years old, and he understood that when she arrived at his door with the particular stillness she was carrying, something foundational had shifted. "He's filing for divorce?" Raymond said. "I believe he's planning to. I believe he's been planning it for some time. The financial extraction started at least 7 months ago." The wire transfers. Raymond was quiet. He looked out at his garden, where the late autumn had turned the plants low and the beds dark. "Your father used to say that a house built on someone else's labor has a short life," he said. "A man who builds on what someone else made and calls it his own has already written the end of his own story. He just doesn't know when he's going to read it yet." He turned and looked at her. "You have the documents? I have all of it. Then you know what to do." She did. Her forensic accountant was a compact, precise woman named Dr. Hazel Burnett, who had testified as an expert witness in 18 cases in the previous 5 years, and who had the particular gift of explaining complex financial structures in plain language, without condescension. Hazel spent 11 days reviewing the holding company records, the contract origination documentation, the marital bank accounts, and the wire transfers. Her report ran to 43 pages. The holding company had been established 4 years before Selena married Derek. The commercial construction contracts, 14 of them, had all been bid and won through the holding company. The marital joint account had received regular transfers from the holding company as what had been categorized on paper as Selena's salary from her own firm, a legitimate and documented structure. The wire transfers Derek had made, totaling $8,000, had been executed from the joint account, which contained only what the holding company had placed there. He had, in other words, wired $8,000 of Selena's own money to his companion. Hazel noted this in her report with the same neutral precision she applied to everything else. In the 4th week after Selena first came to Glynis's office, Derek came home on a Friday evening and found dinner on the table. Selena had made a roast chicken with rice and a green salad. She had set the table with the everyday dishes they'd had since the 2nd year of their marriage. She asked him about his week. He spoke about a client who had been difficult and a commission that was processing late. She listened. She passed him the bread. She asked a follow-up question about the difficult client that required him to talk for another 4 minutes, during which time she registered nothing that he said, because her attention was elsewhere. He did not ask her anything about her week. She was watching. Derek filed for divorce in January. His attorney moved aggressively, arguing that the marital estate included the entirety of Selena's business income over the previous 11 years on the grounds that it had been generated during the marriage and supported by Derek's professional relationships. The argument was constructed around 2 client introductions he had made at social functions, one of which Selena had already converted into a contract before the introduction was made, a fact contained in a dated ref submission in the holding company's records. He did not know about the forensic report. He did not know about Glynis. He knew about the attorney Selena had retained for the formal proceedings, a younger man from a reputable firm who he apparently believed was working with the information Derek's attorney intended to present. The court date arrived in March. Derek arrived with his attorney and a set of exhibits that his legal team had spent 4 months assembling. He nodded at Selena across the courtroom in a way that communicated something she chose not to name. She looked at him without expression and turned back to Glynis, who sat beside her as co-counsel. The proceeding lasted most of the day. Derek's attorney presented the argument about marital assets, the professional network, the dinner party introductions. The judge listened. Derek's attorney was skilled and well-prepared and had constructed a plausible narrative from the available surface facts, which was exactly what a skilled attorney was paid to do. Derek sat at the plaintiff's table with the expression of a man who believed the shape of the proceeding was moving the direction he expected. He looked across at Selena twice. She did not return the look either time. Glynis sat beside her and said nothing that wasn't necessary. The argument about the marital estate took the better part of the afternoon. Selena's retained attorney responded to each point with competence and without the kind of alarm that would have told Derek's team they were doing real damage. This was by design. The forensic report was not introduced. The holding company origination documents were not introduced. The full picture was not introduced. What was introduced was just enough to establish that a dispute existed, that the assets were complex, and that the matter required careful consideration by the court. That was all Glynis needed. The judgment came 2 weeks later. $5,200,000 asset reallocation. The judge had reviewed the arguments and found the marital estate claim to be supported by the evidence presented. The evidence that had been presented. Derek walked out of the courthouse with his attorney and 2 of his friends who had driven from Greensboro to witness what he had told them would be an important day for him. He shook his attorney's hand on the steps in the afternoon light. He smiled for a photograph someone took on a phone and posted before they had even reached the parking deck. He had no idea he was 40 minutes into that celebration. A restaurant downtown. A bottle of something with a cork in it. A table where his name was spoken in a tone usually reserved for people who had accomplished a difficult thing, when Glynis's filing arrived in the court's electronic system. The motion to reconsider was 47 pages, attached to Hazel Burnett's forensic report, the full contract origination record for all 14 commercial projects, the holding company articles of organization dated 4 years before the marriage, and a corrected financial disclosure identifying assets that Derek's team had miscategorized as marital property, and which were, under both the original holding company structure and North Carolina's equitable distribution statute, Selina's sole property. The judge reviewed the filing overnight. The following morning, his clerk called both attorneys. The judge wanted them back in the courtroom. Derek arrived looking as if someone had changed the rules of a game he had already won. The holding company documents were presented on a screen at the front of the courtroom. Glynis walked through the timeline with the calm of a person who had spent 40 years reducing complicated things to their plainest form. The holding company, the contracts, the origination dates, the payroll structure, the wire transfers, and where the funds in the joint account had come from, and whose labor had generated them. Derek's attorney attempted to argue that the marriage itself had constituted a professional partnership that entitled Derek to a share of the business's growth during the marriage. The judge asked for the documentation supporting that claim. There was none. There had never been a partnership agreement. There had never been a contract. There had been a dinner party introduction in 2019, and a contract that had already been executed before that introduction was made, and a joint account that had received the company's payroll deposits and nothing else. The judge looked at the exhibit on the screen for a long moment. He looked at Selina. She had not spent 11 years building what she built by misreading the weight a moment was carrying. "Miss Marsh," the judge said, "I owe you an accurate accounting." The revised judgment was issued 6 days later. The prior order was vacated. The holding company assets were confirmed as Selina's sole property. Derek was ordered to return the $8,000 wire transfer from marital funds. His attorney fees were not recoverable. His own attorney's fees were substantial, and they were now his alone to carry. When the order came through, Glynis called Selina at the job site, where she was reviewing structural drawings for a warehouse build in Concord. The same Concord where Derek had stopped for gas on a Wednesday he was supposed to be in Greensboro. She listened to Glynis read the key sections of the order. "Are you all right?" Glynis asked. "I'm fine," Selina said. "I have a site walk in 30 minutes. She hung up and looked at the drawings in her hand and thought about her father, and thought about Glynis's fig tree, and thought about the cedar boards on the screened porch on Caldwell Lane, which she had measured 3 times before cutting. You didn't need to be a structural engineer to know that the thing Derek had built his entire case on had never been load-bearing. 14 months passed. Selina's company completed the Concord warehouse, a distribution facility for a regional logistics firm, on schedule and under budget. The contract had been worth $1 million. The build had come in 8 days early, and the client had sent a letter of commendation that she folded and placed in the same fire-safe box where she kept her license, her holding company documents, and the photograph of her father standing in front of his first completed commercial build, a warehouse of his own, smaller and older, on the south side of Charlotte, in the year he turned 41. She had 3 more projects in development, and a partnership offer from a national firm that had reviewed her portfolio and concluded she was exactly the kind of operator they wanted inside their network. The number they had offered for the equity stake was one she had written on a piece of paper and set in a drawer. not because she hadn't made up her mind, but because she was still in the phase of the process that called for patience and verification, and she had learned long ago to honor that phase. She no longer lived on Caldwell Lane. The house had been sold in the settlement, fairly, cleanly, with the kind of transactional precision that made things easier in the end. She had bought a craftsman bungalow in the Elizabeth neighborhood, 2 miles east, on a street with mature oaks and a neighbor who kept bees and left a small jar of honey on the fence post once a month with a handwritten label. She had spent 2 weekends in September painting the interior herself, and 1 long Saturday in October building raised garden beds in the backyard, which she planned to fill in the spring with whatever her Uncle Raymond thought best, because he knew soil the way she knew load paths. There was a man named Elias who had come into her life through Raymond's church, a civil engineer who asked precise questions and did not perform warmth but had it genuinely, and who had, on their 4th evening together, told her he appreciated that she never seemed to be trying to convince him of anything. She had thought about that for a long time afterward. It was a specific and accurate observation, and it felt like being recognized in the way she had always recognized good structural work, not with drama, but with the quiet acknowledgement of something made right. She heard about Derek the way she heard about most things she had already stopped monitoring, through a third party, without seeking it. Raymond mentioned, in the way Raymond mentioned things he felt she should know, without emphasizing them, that Derek had moved into an apartment in a complex near the airport and had been let go from his sales position, which had apparently lost patience with the ongoing distraction of his legal situation. The legal fees had been significant. His attorney had not been retained for the 2nd round of proceedings. Courtney Vale had relocated to Raleigh. A mutual acquaintance had noted that Derek's mother no longer mentioned him at church, which in Raymond's assessment was the most telling piece of information in the whole summary. Selena registered all of it. She moved on. On a Saturday morning in December, she sat on her new porch with coffee she had made in the dark and watched the morning come into the street. The oaks were bare, and the air held the particular stillness of early winter in the south, and the light when it came was thin and clean and golden in the way of honest things. The raised beds in the back were empty and waiting. The neighbor's fence post held a new jar of honey. Elias was inside. She could hear the low sound of him moving through the kitchen, the particular domesticity of that sound, and she held it without grasping, because she had learned, across the long patient work of her own life, that the things worth keeping were the things you didn't need to hold too tightly. Some things, she thought, were worth the patience to build right. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.